I'm pretty sure it took, when Brandon and I did it the first time, it took us a few goes to fucking work it out.
Yeah.
It is live. Yeah,
Now.
yeah. Alright, here we go again. Hello, I'm Dylan Anderson, and welcome to F1 OWC Podcast Live for episode 11. Today, I am joined by Season 13 World Champion Kurt Dunn. Welcome to the podcast for the very first time.
Cheers, Dylan. Thanks for having me.
Obviously, it's a difficult 12 months, obviously, with the lockdown and coronavirus and all that sort of stuff, which resulted in us running a fast-tracked Season 12 and an extended Season 13 championship, which featured 26 rounds, which covered 12 months of racing, which is something that I hope we never do again. But it was great for you to finally get through and get that breakthrough championship win. Just give us a couple of words in how that felt for you to get that victory after 4 attempts.
Probably after, I guess, how much effort I put into practicing and doing it, it's probably a relief, a little bit of weight. I mean, not that others that aren't in the championship, it doesn't really, I guess, matter too much to them because they're not doing it. They don't know how hard it is. But it's a credit to the league and what you've curated and the drivers that are in it as to how difficult it is to actually win a championship, let alone one that goes for so many rounds in 12 months.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I remember back in Russia in season 9, when you made your debut there for Force India, and you know you were a rookie driver, like many drivers before you were, and to see that development, obviously I moved away from a partnership with Brandon, who you'd formed a strong partnership with over a couple of seasons there, and really finessed that craft. Your days at Renault and early days there at Red Bull, to finally get that step in such a short period of time, because we've had people that have been in the series for a lot longer than that and not you know take that next step. So it's a testament of your commitment to the series, but also to, as you say, the time and effort to go and race at the level required to win a championship. Obviously, Oscar Grant, our Kiwi driver, stepped up big for Ferrari. Obviously, he was the reigning champion going into last season. Just give us a few words on what your season was like battling the Ferrari.
Yeah, well, it had its ups and downs. It was we had our battles. Some some were good, some were not so good. You didn't end up on the right end of the stick. Sometimes you did. I mean, I like to feel that we both had a fair bit, and still do have a fair bit of respect for each other on the track. We race hard, and it's racing. Things happen. But at the end of the day, if I was probably going to pick anyone to go side by side through 3 or 4 corners while racing, and you know, pretty, 95% of the time trust that we're not going to make contact or not, you know, deliberately take each other out. That's who I'd rather do it with. But yeah, it's a testament to him. Since Brandon sort of stepped away in season 12, I believe it was, or it's season 13, but season 12, I think he won the championship last, and Oscar won season 13. He's stepped up as well and been the benchmark for that year and a bit. And it's really pushed me to, well, how would you put it? Pushed me to sort of, I guess, reach his benchmark and maybe even try and raise it a level if I can.
Yeah, and it's something that's been fundamental for a lot of the drivers that have been around uh, for long periods of time within this series. The one thing, the advantage that this F1 AWC series has is that it has been around for a long time, and it does have a deep history in drivers and different generations of drivers. Obviously, which I touched on in earlier podcasts. Myself and Peter Dongo back in the early, season 1 and 2, that was our era. And then there was the Williams era with, Mitchell, Chris Patterjack, myself, and then it was me and Brenton again in the Mercedes. And then we dropped away, and then it was Brian and Brandon, 2 new drivers out of nowhere, raised the bar, and they dominated for a good period of time until, Nathan Mazzolo came and raised the bar again. And then there are some drivers that have the ability to be able to adapt and raise their performance, or like Peter Dongo, not be able to do that, not want the challenge, and end up falling by the wayside. So with Brian leaving, Brandon stepping away, you and Oscar have seemed to have become that next benchmark. And I think it's a testament. Eventually someone will, as it always does, come along and raise the bar again, as it continues to get more competitive on the grid. Obviously, you touched on your partnership there with Brandon. You played a very big part in aiding him to his 3rd championship, and obviously learning a lot from him and his racecraft and strategy and finesse and all that sort of stuff. How did it affect you in the season where you were in a position to win the championship and Brandon left?
Look, it was, I guess, there's 2 sides to it. There's one part of me, it was disappointing because it didn't have the support from someone that knows so much, his strategy and, the ways to play the game. But then the other side of it, it allowed me to sort of, I guess, come to fruition on my own, and it's sink or swim, really. You gotta learn the strategy and fight your battle on your own. I was lucky enough that Shannon was promoted through to Red Bull halfway through the season, and him being up the front and being able to challenge for the lead and wins outright, and not giving me positions was a good thing as well, because it wasn't just taking points away from me, it was taking points away from those that I'm challenging at the same time on his own merit. But obviously I respect Brandon's, reason for leaving. It was a lot on his mind that, he had other things going on in his life that he needed to sort out. So that's obviously more important. At the end of the day, we all do it for fun. It is just a game, and we, that's why we do it, because it's supposed to be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, that, as you touched on before, the stress and the pressure to deliver championships and to run at the front consistently isn't something that you can just turn up on the day and hope for the best. If you are serious about contending a championship, it takes time. And I think that pressure over, Brandon debuted in season 6, that pressure had finally got to him. He's taken a season off, 12 months off. He seems to have come back recharged and refreshed, and we'll see what history writes moving forward. Moving on to season 14, me personally, I didn't think back in 2013 that we'd still be here, on the eve of our 8th year anniversary, kicking off season 14. We're just going to run through the driver lineup. Obviously, you and Shannon have remained at Red Bull Racing for this season. I think that's, again, another strong partnership. And the same with Ferrari, unchanged driver lineup with Oscar Grant and Harry Ryan. Myself returning to McLaren for the first time since season 10, alongside Brandon Tanti, who makes his debut in Orange, and his returns, first time that we've been teammates since our partnership at Red Bull in season 9. Trent Fuller and Chris Patterjack make the move to Aston Martin. Jess McEwen and Steve Shadlow replace myself at AlphaTauri. Mitchell Collin remains at Williams, taking the honours of the most seasons run at a single team from myself at Red Bull, which I held for a long period of time. So obviously he's got dedication to the team and the brand there at Williams. He's alongside Daniel Aspo, who moves from Haas. Rookie driver Jared Kershaw makes his debut in F1 AWC in Alpine, and Ryan Lowe returns, obviously off the back of a difficult season, which he also took a break from. Partners alongside his brother Jaden, and then Braden Gray making his debut at Mercedes alongside returning Dylan Call. So we've got two drivers there that are making their debuts in the series. Obviously, two drivers that we both know outside of the league in endurance karting. What would you say about Jared's expectations and pre-season preparations going into winter testing in the first round?
Well, I'd probably say his expectations were a lot higher than what I personally knew was probably capable, only because of how hard it is to adjust to the game from racing things real life. Not having that feel in your whole body of the car and what the car's doing, you're having to rely obviously on a steering wheel and feedback.
Because he's a great driver in endurance karts, benchmark driver.
Oh yeah, he should be in the pro level. In the endurance karting, there's and I'm not even at that level. He's a lot quicker than me, so I think his expectations coming into the league was that he was going to come in and he was going to be on about the same pace or a little bit slower than us, just because he didn't know the tracks or whatever, or the cars. But I think it surprised him to actually show how far off he was, and he has actually, to his credit, done a lot of practice. He's been doing, I think he got game 2 or 3 weeks prior to the new season. The first week he probably spent a good somewhere between 6 to 10 hours, I reckon, on it in total, doing different things. And then I did some practice with him, just to see how he was going and whatnot. I think the biggest adjustment for him was learning what curbs you can run, what curbs you can't run, how tricky the throttle actually is if you do make that step and go to no traction control. But I think his first round overall was pretty successful, considering I think he had a DNF in this. He finished the first race, the sprint race, and then had a DNF in the feature race. But he's only really about a second off at most, I think, the lead pace, which is pretty good considering he hasn't done any of this, and most of us have been doing it for a couple of seasons at least.
Well, yeah, that's exactly right. So he qualified 10th in qualifying for Australia, which on debuts, fantastic result in itself. But yeah, you're absolutely right. You're coming into a series where you haven't raced these type of cars. They're fast. You get the energy recovery. The cornering speeds are a lot higher, and you're going up against drivers that have been doing this for 3, 4, 5 years, and of course you're always going to be on the back foot, and it takes the right type of person to want to dig in and extract as much time in practice as they can to close that gap. And it's unfortunate that there have been drivers in the past that have turned up, they've been off the pace, and they've walked away from it. I think with Braden as well, I think he's come into it similar initially with expectations high, getting used to the cars and the tracks and all that sort of stuff, and seeing the gap to the leading group. I think he's reset his expectations a little bit. I think he had a great Australian Grand Prix, finishing the points. So points on debut is something is an achievement that only ever comes around once. So to be able to pick up points on debut is something that will stay with him forever, and he joins a niche group of drivers.
I was just looking at the graphic. Then he's finished in P8 for the sprint race, and he's 20 seconds off the lead, but that's not really. I think he had some issues or a spin or something, and so that's not really that far behind, considering the pace differential. And if you compare it to F1 in real life, they're laps ahead of 10th place.
Yeah, absolutely. It's it was an interesting interesting Australian Grand Prix for many things. Obviously, we've had a regulation change moving towards fixed setups in aid to close the gap between the front runners and the mid pack and the back markers. I think in lap pace, you could argue it has closed the gap a little bit, but at the same time, I feel that, some of the gaps in qualifying were, further spread out than what they have been in the past. Mind you, last season we'd already done a season on that generation of games, so I think once we cycle through this 10-round championship, which again is something that we haven't done, we've gone from 26 rounds to 10. By the time we cycle through those 10 and we start, season 15 or whatever, people are going to have a good couple of months under their belt with this engine of game, and I think we'll start to see that gap close a little bit. Me personally, I've, as you know, I've put more time into practice outside of the official sessions. Obviously, we haven't ran official practice in a couple of seasons now, but outside of the main events, I've been putting in some effort to try and close that gap and better myself and me personally. I've mentioned it to yourself and Brandon outside of the podcast that for me to be where I was in Australia, qualifying P3, in practice I'd done potential to be on the front row, but then to get a podium, and then obviously the feature race was difficult, but to walk away with a P3 in qualifying and a podium finish and still not being satisfied with that performance is, I think, a testament to the effort that's gone into getting back on the pace. And I haven't been in this position, for 4 years, since back in season 9. So to be back in a competitive place, I'm really pleased with how everything's playing out so far. What are your thoughts on the Australian Grand Prix, Kurt?
I think for you, like you said, for yourself, your practice that you've put in has paid off. I mean, when I first started in season 9, I was around that 6th, 7th position mark consistently, and I was always looking forward. And you were in that top 4 consistently. And you've gone from controller back to other steering wheels and bits and pieces, and done full circle. And in the last couple of seasons, I've obviously brought up, my pace is increased significantly. But I think, like if you look at last season, your pace, was consistently about 3 to 4 tenths, give or take, depending on the track and different things, off, probably the leading 3, 4. But, I think with the fixed setups, it has its goods and bads. I like things about it, but there's other things that I don't like about it, versus last season's regulations. But that's another topic on its own. But I think for you to be competitive in that top group, it's going to take it's actually going to take that more practice to be that, I think, to be the leading driver, whereas before it wasn't as much about practice, and it was probably more about putting effort into your setup. Your setup versus just physical driving practice. So I think what we have, in taking away that difficulty of having to set up a car, we've put in the difficulty of having to put more physical time in and actually just driving what we got.
Yeah, and learning sort of to drive that better. Finessing that racecraft, yeah. Yeah.
But I mean, in other terms, in other the other outlook of Australia sprint for itself. I mean, I had a pretty poor start to the season to backing up the championship. I think Harry and Ryan have come out firing. They've taken some pretty big shots. Harry getting pole, by 3 or 4 tenths, which is a fair. I think it's 3 tenths actually, or something like that. Is a fair margin for fixed setups. In history for myself, Australia hasn't been a good track record for me. I think I've always been in the top 5, but Personally, I mean, I ran into a couple of issues during the race, made a mistake with regulations and tyres in the feature race, which hurt. But
Yeah, I
we move
think,
on.
yeah, absolutely. It was probably one of the more uh, difficult title campaign or title defense campaigns from yourself. But I think looking at it on the paper, it's quite easily, it's quite easy to make the conclusion that Harry's the one with the pace, Ryan's there with with also with the pace, and they're going to run away with it. But I don't think that is the case because you look at qualifying, you know yourself, me, Brandon, in practice had done times sufficient enough for pole. Obviously, we didn't execute it on the day,
Yeah,
but
definitely.
Brandon crashed out early in the session, so he wasn't able to capitalise. Shannon had done minimum, practice. So, and Oscar has been on the back foot because again, minimum practice with time getting the game and all that sort of stuff. And then come the race, you've been caught up in stuff. Brandon got caught up in stuff in the first race, and then in the second race, it was I got caught up, you got caught up, Shannon got caught up. So I think Harry and Ryan were very fortunate to be on the podium, but I don't think that's an absolute definitive pace setters. I think once this the new season feels kind of settle down, and everything sort of settles down into week to week racing, that we can get an idea of where everyone sits in the championship. But to be 55 odd points behind in the championship is not probably where you thought you'd be after one round.
Yeah, definitely not. It's definitely a hit, and it's given him a good head start. But I guess you just got to keep your head down, and I'll have to keep knuckling away at the next couple of races and try and claw some of that deficit back. I mean, looking back at last season, if I'm gonna to be honest, I didn't really look at the championship standings or even think about being in the leader or the top 2 or 3 until come about half season or just after half season, and I'm fighting up for the top and trying to claw back the gap that Oscar did start out with.
Mm.
But yeah, what you touched on with the pace in qualifying, I don't believe I got a clean lap. I mean, Harry obviously got a good lap. He got held up, I think, by one of the other drivers, but then managed to punch out a lap at the very end, which bettered his time by 2 or 3 tenths again.
Yeah,
But
well, I think
yeah, sorry, like you said, there was 2 or 3 drivers that probably shoulda, woulda, coulda been there. If you look at the pace from qualifying through to the race pace, the fastest race pace was significant. There's a significant gap between the fastest race pace and even probably the top 5, or 5th place. You're probably looking at 2 or 3 seconds. I think over a race that probably plays a big what do you call it? Plays a big role. When if you stay out of trouble, you're going to be at the front. But if you keep getting caught up, like I managed to, and you and Brandon managed to here or there, and Shannon, it's going to hurt you through the whole race. And those that just stay out of the trouble will end up shining through.
Yeah, well, that's actually that's right, because historically, I've sort of been known to being consistent and staying out of trouble. Obviously, the last couple of seasons are that exception, but finding that new pace and then qualifying well and getting on the podium come the feature race, when I knew that I had the pace, I was probably a little bit too eager to get through the traffic than probably what I would have been in the seasons past, and that obviously resulted in some contact, with some damage, which compromised my race, forced me into the pit lane too many times, and then even at the end there when we had that last safety car and I was on fresh softs, and okay, yes, I was in 11th, but we were all bunched up. It was like a 5-lap sprint, and everyone in front of me had penalties. So if I could pick my way through the traffic without getting damage, I could have been, again on for another good result, except I didn't. I've made contact, and then I've ended up, compromising my own race. So I think you are right in that sense in being consistent and not being too eager to plough through the traffic, because I think this year's game, wing damage is more pronounced. It's basically on the edge of undrivable. I know I opted to stay out for the last 4 laps, but I was losing 4, 5, 6 seconds a lap. And then
I think Australia, just on that though, I think Australia exaggerates that a bit too though, because most of it's high speed, high load corners. But yes, I do think the same. I think it is a little bit more pronounced than the previous game.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's obviously, Brandon, welcome to the podcast for 2021.
Hello.
Welcome back. Just
probably haven't heard from me in a while. Like that.
Some would say it's a good thing.
Oh well, according to you, yeah.
Kurt's thrown himself under the bus. Just touching on reflections from Australia there, Brandon. What's your take? Obviously, first time in Orange in McLaren, first time back since I think it was Austria. Oh no, it was Monza when you got your win last season. And what's it like being back in the car after 10 months away?
Good. I mean, I think having a bit of a break was good for me. I think time away from the game was good. Plus, I had a fair few things going on at the time, but actually coming back again and and being part of the league again was good fun. Obviously, probably still a bit rusty, some things to learn from Australia itself, like I discussed, but like being in McLaren's good. I think it's great to have you as a teammate again, like we were in season 9.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I briefly mentioned to Kurt outside of the podcast, and obviously yourself, that we hadn't been teammates since season 9. I haven't been competitive since season 9. It's been 4 years. So for us to get back into a constructor contending position, I think that has to be realistic. Obviously, it's not without the time and effort put in. But I think with Kurt and Oscar and Harry, have raised that bar now that you've been away, and Kurt did well to step out of your shadow, so to speak, and go on to win his championship. I think that was really good for Kurt's ability to go racing and to be independent, and because we were working together, Kurt, Shannon and I, on strategy and that throughout last season and setup and all that sort of stuff, but Kurt had really stepped up to be the leader of that group.
You mean, it was more like you guys just used my setup and I did the setup?
I'm I'm pretty sure everyone was either using your setup or Oscar's setup. That's just how it was.
The open consensus, didn't it?
It was fixed setups of your setups.
Yeah.
So no, I think it was good. It's good to have you guys back, but I think it's a good point of your career too to make that step away to McLaren and sort of rebuild and not have that pressure of being at Red Bull, being at Ferrari, Mercedes.
Yeah, and I think coming back to the game, I think kind of surprised myself with the pace that I had. Felt like I thought I'd be a bit behind, but I've sort of surprised myself a bit. I think you were saying it too when we were doing a bit of practice like before.
Yeah,
Australia.
I was a bit sort of surprised. I'm like, this guy takes 10 months away, comes back, and he's on the pace in like 40 minutes of practice. And I was like, man, if only I had that ability. But,
but that's because you didn't see the 20 hours career mode behind it.
Yeah, that is true. No, I think it should be good. Obviously, as you say, having that time away, you do need to find that pace again. I think Ryan is in the same position. He's had the same time away. I don't think he was initially probably as dominant as he probably would like. Because again, like I touched on with qualifying, Brandon should have been up there. Shannon should have been up there. Oscar should have been up there. I mean, I out-qualified him.
Yeah.
We should have been, on paper, should have been, contending for the pole. So I think it'll take a couple of, rounds and a bit more practice for him to, find his form, but also to see where he sits, because he may not be the leading driver that he was back when he was challenging yourself for the championship.
It takes a bit of time, and each person's different how they approach things, especially with the game and how they go about practicing or getting the feel for it. Obviously, it's a bit of a different handling model compared to the last game, especially with the curves. I think it's quite terrible, as you saw, like with my blunder in qualifying. I felt that time, it was very much gettable, but that is something that I have to swallow, to what happened.
I think this game's very much gone back to almost Season 9. I remember Season 9 is in that same corner. I can't remember the corner number, sorry, forgive me.
Exit at turn 12.
Yeah, I remember in Season 9 it was the same problem. You couldn't touch curb inside, outside, or you're going around.
Yeah.
I think we've had a bit of luxury between then and now, though. That's been pretty nice.
Yeah, it's definitely more challenging. But I think it was in season 11 or 12, like at Monza, where you basically straight lining the curbs to get the speed, get the lap time. I think you won't be able to do that this year because there's probably like 80% chance you're going into the fence. And with these cars and how aero sort of dependent they are, they snap, and once they go, it's very, very difficult to catch them. I mean, you saw in my qualifying lap there in Australia, Brandon, on the lap that I went for P3, I come out of turn 12 and had that touch that curb and had that snap, but it didn't go to the point where it rotated, so I was able to keep the boot in and keep going.
You caught it and you managed to finish the lap. It was still a good lap. I mean, I think credit to yourself that you still managed to set a good time, even though despite some of the scruffiness of the lap.
Yeah, it wasn't, as you know, it wasn't the best lap, but again, testament to Harry. He delivered on the day. It's all good looking at the numbers and going, oh, we should have had pole, we should have had this, should have had that. If you don't deliver it in the main event, then it means nothing. Obviously, some disappointing things to come out of the Australian Grand Prix. Obviously, a few regulation breaches, Daniel Asmo's part, not practicing, not doing winter testing, retiring out on track, retiring in both races. I think he'll need to sort of readdress what he wants to do, because I know he's impeded, Harry and a few other guys in their flying lap with their ghost car, putting around the track, which is something that we've always historically frowned upon. And again, with your teammate Kurt Shannon, he did minimal amount of practice going into this season, and it showed. I think the pace advantage he had last season, enabled him to have a bit more of a sort of relaxed mindset that he could rock up to a weekend and potentially challenge for pole, top 4 finish at worst. Happy days.
I think it was at times. There was times last season where he would he would have better pace than I would at some tracks.
Well, yeah.
I think the biggest letdown for him, not letdown, but his biggest, I probably would say his Achilles heel would be his race pace consistency and picking and choosing that battle and whether it's worth it or it's not. That's where I think he lost out the most, because there would have been at least half a dozen or more races that he would have got pole. I was either second or didn't pull it off and was further down, and Harry and Oscar were between us. But during the race, I would manage to claw that back a little bit.
I think it comes back to, um, obviously he hadn't done as much practice as he probably should have going into Australia, and it showed on pace. But
Yeah.
also, again, in
The fixed setups hurt that too.
the fixed
unfortunately.
the fixed setups hurt that as well. But again, that racecraft, and going back to what I said about me in the feature race, having that pace for the first time, and then pushing the overtake and pushing the challenge too soon, rather than just taking a step back, getting them on the straight on the next corner and whatever, resulting in damage. I think Shannon's some of his moves and overtakes and racecraft was a bit questionable, a bit reckless. Which for someone that has got so many pole positions and so many race wins and podiums, it was a little bit disheartening to see such a fall from grace, if you could say. And I hope that he's able to rebound for Austria and get back to the form that we've all known, because I've definitely talked Shannon up a lot in the past about potentially being a world champion, and there's been a few times where he's had the pace, but he's lacked in racecraft and or consistency in the race, and I just don't think he has that freedom to not get away with not doing as much practice as he should be if he wants to challenge.
Yeah, definitely. I think he's probably it's a bit of a shock for him too not to have the pace. I think he come out qualifying 6th or 7th or further down. I think he was expecting to be a bit higher up, but again, only doing practice from the day before, it doesn't help. And also in the terms of gaming these days, there's a lot of other motorsport gaming out there that people do probably spend a bit more time on here or there, and that can affect just the game ergonomics.
Oh, 100%.
With braking points, speed of the screen, speed of the car in the screen.
I think these cars are probably one of the more difficult cars to drive based on the acceleration, the cornering speed, the braking speed, and obviously this game engine's different to iRacing or Forza or Assetto Corsa, and in the past I've always wanted to do like Gran Turismo or Project Cars and some GT endurance racing and stuff like that, but you find yourself putting in time there, and then you're costing yourself 2-3 tenths in competitiveness in being out of a Formula One seat.
Well, I found that straight away. Like, I've dabbled in Assetto and iRacing recently, and done probably more of that than F1, and I didn't think there would be such a big difference. I didn't know what everyone was talking about, but it did. Like, when I come back to racing F1, I was like, oh shit! Like, even my throttle response, it was wheel spinning too much all the time, or braking traction and stepping out on me. Those are the little things that like you said, they cost you a tenth or two.
Yeah, and I was going to say, like, coming back to Shannon, I think hopefully getting used to racing with the grid that we have, and I think we've got to highlight that it's probably with everyone, like, this is one of the largest grids we've had in a while. So we I think everyone's had the sort of test of racing with each other for the first round. I'm just hoping that Shannon can actually learn from that.
Well, it's fantastic to see the large numbers back on the grid. Like, I was looking through the replays afterwards and taking some photos of the races and stuff like that, and to see a nearly full grid of cars, after 14 seasons and 8 years of doing it, to be still carrying these kind of numbers is it's special. But obviously at the end of last year numbers were low, but again, coming back to that 26 round championship, I think it was just too stretched out. We've got a 10 round championship, and then we'll probably have a break, and then if we want to go again, we'll go again. But it's a more achievable for drivers to commit, and I think too what was there was a lot of incidents that come out of Australia, but you've got to have a look. You've got half the grid that are raced with each other for the last 2 and a bit years, and then you've got the other half of the grid that's taken a year off. So you've got a group of people that are used to racing with each other, and ones that are still trying to find their feet. So I think it'll take a couple of races for it to settle down, And I really hope we've implemented the penalty point system. I haven't really seen too much feedback from people and what their thoughts are from that, but I think that Kurt and myself did a good job on Friday going through all of the incidents that were submitted. I think we've reviewed them partially as we can, and with the penalty point system, the drivers can see where they are at on points, and it kind of puts them in control of what they want to do. If they keep driving the way that Shannon was, well, you're going to keep picking up penalty points, and it's going to get to that point where you start getting penalties, you start getting bans, and hopefully it's and I don't want to ban people from races, but if it's costing other people their races due to negligence or not practicing or whatever, then you've got to meet in the middle somewhere. And I just hope that drivers like Shannon and Daniel Aspo and all that sort of stuff see where they're at on their penalty points and go, okay, look, we're going to go into Austria a little bit more calm, a little bit more relaxed, and we'll see how it goes. But as you know, we're all racers, and that's not going to be the case, and it's probably going to be another bloodbath.
Turn 1 and turn 3.
Yeah, because you've got Shannon going up the inside of both corners. So I think pretty sure he's still the only driver that's adamant with his cockpit camera. I know when you were doing some pre-season with Jared that you talked him out of his camera angle that he was using.
Yeah, he was, of that, that racer heart, got to be in the cockpit. That's where you normally see from and drive from. But unfortunately, you're using a flat screen and not using your, 3D vision, I guess, that you would have in everyday life. It's not that easy. I started out trying to run cockpit view, and you just can't see as much. Like, you can't see the apex of the corner, you can't see the curb, whether you touched it or you didn't.
Not for league racing, anyway.
No, I think if you wanted to refine and get every millimeter out of it that you can, and then also be able to race other people side by side, I don't think it's really the best view to use when using this game, but each to their own. That's why we're all individuals. But I think he decided to end up going back to the TV pod as well. Once he got used to it, he understood the benefits of it.
Yeah, that's right. Especially you can see where your wheels are, where the edge of the track is, where you're clipping points.
And you also see how much turn you have in the steering wheel versus how much the wheels are actually turning, and whether you're understeering or not. Because most steering wheels, unless you've got a very upmarket steering wheel, won't give you that feedback.
Yeah, that's right. Obviously, looking ahead at the Austrian Grand Prix, which was originally supposed to be the Imola Grand Prix. Obviously, we don't have that track yet in the game. It may or may not come. We don't know. But we're off to Austria, a track that you've been pretty good at in recent times, Kurt. What's your thought on the Austrian Grand Prix ahead?
Can it be tomorrow? So I can put Australia behind me.
Australia's pretty bad.
I think if you watch, Austria racing in real life, even in the game, it's very similar. There's only 7, 10 corners, 11 corners, something like that. So it is very minimal corners. There's not a lot of room for error. If you do make an error, you lose a lot of lap time. It's one that I've always enjoyed. I don't really know why. Australia, I've had speed at Australia, but I've not clicked with it race wise. It's just seems to be too many errors. Haven't got the flow of the track.
That's always been my case as well. It's a track that I've always liked, but never had success at.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I nearly did until the second last corner 2 seasons ago when I dumped it myself on the last lap.
Bloody rookie error.
I think, with Austria, I think one of the things I think might be an issue is track limits. I know that there's a fair few places in Austria where you can push the limits of the track, or even just going along normal racing line, going over some of those curves, just even slightly will pick up on it.
Well, let me ask
One,
you guys both. Do you think that the curbs punish you enough in this game to not run strict corner cutting?
Brandon?
my view. I think with this game, I think yes. I think, uh, especially a lot of tracks, like you can tell like straight away, especially the feeling of the car going over some of the curves. Like you can't push the car as hard as you would, like especially the past probably few editions of the game before this. I think it does. Well, the result of like what happened to me in Australia is probably a good example, and even probably some of the other guys, if they reflect on their race, they could probably see that going over some of the curbs can really hurt. You know, it doesn't actually gain you time most of the time anyway.
Well, you're not gaining time if you're in the fence, hey?
No,
What are your thoughts on the curbs and track limits in the current game, Kurt?
Uh, I think it's going to be very track specific,
Mm.
personally. I think there's some tracks where there's curbs that you can run, even in this game, from what I've seen, where you gain time, and then there's going to be tracks where you can't, and it will hurt you more. I think the only downside to running not or like not running strict track limits, I think it makes, I don't know, as a driver, I think it makes you know more of a grey area on the corner. Like you're going to have to do practice to find the limit. Where is the limit? Don't know.
Mm.
Whereas with it on strict, it's the white line. It's the edge of that curb. That's it.
Yeah,
Um, when you go back to standard, the standard track limits setting,
it's a
it
bit
seems to
loose.
let you run that curb a lot more or beyond in some corners. I mean, I haven't tried it yet, but obviously it's got to be more.
Mm.
Um,
Well, I
so I think it's
found
50-50 really.
Yeah, I found at the last corner of Austria, that curb there. There's been a few times where I've kind of middled it, but I've still been on the curb, and it's just like nah. And then there have been other times where I've still got two wheels on the track, and it's still like nah. Like
Yeah, I
track
think
limits.
that's one thing I found. It's been the game. This game has been sometimes inconsistent. I don't know if it picks up that whether you've gained or lost time, or whether you're equal, or whether it's just blanket you're over that line.
Mm. And there's a
Um,
few times there where even at turn one, where I've nailed the apex, but then on exit I've gone wide up over the yellow sausage curb and kept going through that little sort of runoff there, and it hasn't penalised me.
yeah, and you come out only like a tenth down or
Yeah,
half a tenth down. Yeah.
but if I've gone out onto the yellow and then come back onto the track, that pins me. But if I go up and over it, it's
Mm.
like
Yeah, I've
carry
seen
on.
that a couple of times too.
All
Not that
right.
I've been doing any practice or anything.
Yeah, no practice here.
No.
Um, so what's your expectations going into Austria, Brandon?
well, it's a track that I actually like it a lot more than Australia. I have to say that
I
much.
do like the landscape of the track. It's a very visually pleasing circuit, I
Yeah,
must say.
having a few laps over the track that I've already done, expecting better things at Australia. I hope, like over both races, that is probably more so in the sake of consistency. Than, yeah, expecting a good show, um, especially from the front guys. I think it'd be competitive as it was, maybe even more. So yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. I, I
Yeah, I think
I'm
it will be.
I'm probably the same. I think hopefully we can take what we've learnt from Australia, at least strategy wise. I know I made a big blunder in not boxing under safety car when I thought it was a VSC, and then nearly passed it, and then obviously the changes with the automatic changing of the strategy and stuff like that being put onto the wrong tyres. I know you were caught out with that, Kurt, but we there's definitely some homework to take out of Australia into Austria. Um, Me personally, I think pace should be good, but I think trying to be a little bit more patient with the overtakes because it is a small track. It is aero dependent, so if you lose a wing, you're stuffed. So
Yeah, especially second two.
it's not. It's going to be a fine balance between pushing trying to open the gap or close the gap, and touching the curb, getting a penalty, getting damage, running into the back of someone. It's going to be that balance, and it's one of those tracks that always kind of, deliver good racing, but as we've seen in the past with Ryan and Shannon, some controversial racing as well. So what are your thoughts going into Austria, Kurt?
Yeah, well, for one, looking forward to it. Like Brandon said, I like the track. It's, track limits is going to be an issue. I think the first race is under our belt. There'll be, I'm hoping a bit calmer with, like you said, the overtakes. One from myself as well. Not forcing that move that doesn't need to happen, or it can wait till later on. I know race one that caught me out. And then you get behind the 8 ball and you're trying to catch up, so you're pushing harder. You end up running into mistakes like being on the same tyres back to back, which is a no-no in the regulations. But yeah, I guess you got to cop that on the chin and move on. I think come to Austria, I think like Brandon said, the pace is going to be a lot faster. I think the group of the leading group is going to be probably expand from the Ryan and Harry being the quickest sort of thing consistently. I think it will expand to the 4 or 5 of us that were there or thereabouts but weren't on it.
I think the fight for pole will be one to watch.
Yeah, definitely. I think that again, that's going to come down to track limits. I think that's
a
big governor of that, and whether you can manage to get
the lap
time
on the
in
day.
or not.
Yeah, you get the lap on the day. I think also too it'll. Yeah, I think the battle for pole will be a lot higher, but I think at the same time, I think Harry and Ryan will also be looking to, elevate their performance after Australia too, because I think qualifying, in qualifying to be, from Ryan's point, to be outqualified by, myself and you, Kurt, there are more people in the challenge than what the results say. And I think that, us not being in a position to capitalise on that performance in Australia has sort of shown our hand of what the potential is. So I think, Harry and Ryan will be looking to elevate that and increase the gap if they can.
Yeah, definitely. I think even if you look at it, Oscar had, he was a consistent race. His pace wasn't as fast as everyone else, just looking at the classifications. It wasn't as fast as the leaders either. I think he'll be one to watch. I think he would have gone home and done some homework and practice. It was a bit of an eye opener, like for a couple of others.
Yeah, that's right. And he banked. Oscar was, had a quiet race weekend, but he still banked points in both races, which has still put him in a good position in the championship. Where I had a good sprint race and a poor feature. Brandon had a poor sprint and a good feature, and yourself was a bit average in both. But it just goes to show that you don't have to be on the podium to do well.
Yeah, you just got to consistently be in those points.
I think you could look at back to season 9 and Brian. He banking points.
Well, yeah, that's right. When
the tail end of that season.
Yeah, when Nathan Mazzolo turned up and won 5 races in a row, and you and myself were trying to close the gap on pace to him, that Brian was sitting back picking up P4s regularly, and because Nathan was taking points off of us, we weren't able to close the gap to Brian, and he inherited a bloody championship. But did
he win a race that season?
Yeah, because initially he started that season as the benchmark, and then we got to Monaco, and then I destroyed Monaco, and then Nathan Mazzolo turned up at Canada, and then he won 5 straight wins from pole out of nowhere, and it's just like, where the hell did this come from? And then Brandon won it twice after that in Spa and Monza, and then Brian won Singapore, then I won Japan.
Please. Yeah, not Singapore.
Yeah, then I won Japan, so then it was, he didn't win from, Spain to Singapore. But because he was picking up regular 4th places, and Nathan was taking points off of us, we weren't able to close the gap. So then by the time we got to the end, he was consistent enough to manage that. I think it was like 60-point gap that he had. He managed it with fourth place finishes.
It probably didn't help that it didn't help you guys that you didn't have double points and 2 races.
Well, yeah, that's right, and I think
it was just a single race.
it was it was pretty standard procedure. We had our practice, we had our quali, we had our race, and we moved on. I think
because now these days you look at a 50% race, you can. I mean, the difference between being in the points and not is 50 points. That's a massive gap.
Yeah, it's huge, and it'll swing, the championship massively. And if you look at some of the positional changes that have happened last season, we've had this regulation structure for a couple of seasons now, but and I think the format works really well. I think the tyre regulation forcing the 2-stop works really well. Gives more option. It's not a straight green light to checkered formality, if whatever you want to say, but yeah, I think it's a different era. Taking nothing away from Brian, he won the championships as they were set in that era. As did Brandon with his first couple, as I did with mine. They were the benchmarks of that era.
Season 9 Singapore is one I like to forget.
He won that race. Honestly, he won that race with a 30-second time penalty given by the stewards, and he still won it by like 2 seconds.
Because he was out in front by that far, wasn't he?
Yeah, because the two.
Yeah, I remember that.
Two Saubers, Nathan Mazzola and Wayne, qualified on the front row, and then opted to start on inters in heavy wet conditions, and then went off at the start, put themselves in the fence, and then Brandon inherited the lead. Then Brandon disconnected, and then Brian inherited the lead, and Brian won the race. And it's just like, oh.
Singapore has a knack for that, like when Ryan disconnected and ended up halfway up the building.
Yeah. Just, it was good times, but anyway,
looking back at some of these results too, I wanted to from Australia. I wanted to give a shout out to Jess outscoring her teammate 2 races in a row in points, double points.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Again, from our first and only woman racer in the sport. I think the development she's done as a driver over the past 12 months since she started full time, phenomenal effort.
She's got some mongrel about her too.
Yeah, absolutely. Seen obviously some live streams, and she's not afraid to throw hands in an argument, so it's good.
Yeah, and another one just touching on that too, as I noticed, looking at the results at the quiet achiever, I think for the week or the 2 races would have as Mitchell Collin is P5 in the sprint race and a P7 in the feature race. He's sort of gone under the radar.
Yeah, absolutely, and Mitchell's been in a position last season and prior seasons where he has won races, he has got podiums. Obviously, season 3 world champion. Let's not forget that he does have the ability to win races and win championships.
That's a long time ago, though.
It's a long time ago, and we're both in that same boat where I was dominating that era, and he was the driver that come around and ended that streak. And so for him to turn it around after, so long, we're talking back in 2014, to turn it around and be in a position to be competitive, win races, and we had some great scraps last season, and it's almost winding back the clock. It's like when you watch F1 and you've got Kimi and Vettel or Alonso and Hamilton
Michael Schumacher coming back to Mercedes after having a hiatus.
Yeah, and it's good to see that there are still drivers that are on the grid that have been there for that long and are remaining competitive. And I think also too, as controversial as this individual is, I think Chris Padajak needs some praise as well. P5 in the feature race, I believe, at the top of my head. That's his highest placed finish in a race since he retired at the start of season 5. So, he's had a couple of goes at coming back and racing and then leaving again and whatever. But to come back and to get a P5 finish is good for him. And I think at the moment, as it stands,
especially on a controller.
And on a controller, that's right. And I think at the moment, as it stands, the competitive sort of depth in the field of drivers we've got is healthy.
Yeah, it's going to hurt. You make a mistake, there's more positions to lose versus. I think the last quarter of last season there was only 6 of us racing. I think at most races, so at worst you're going to be 6 if you had a spin or had an incident but didn't retire.
Yeah,
whereas
that's
now
right.
You're in P17 or 18. Good luck.
Yeah, that's right. If you have to do a drive through or get a penalty or spin or get damage, you're going to be punished for it. And I think that's what the first half of last season. That was what the good part was. Everyone had someone to race, and if you did make a mistake, you got punished through it. Through position loss. And I think, as you said, the back end of last season, people could afford luxury pit stops and be confident that you could just cruise along, stay out of trouble, and pick up a top 5.
Yeah, well, look at the the sprint race that I had in Australia. I up some wing damage. Probably to the end, I think it was on the last safety car. I think that we had, and essentially because of that, I ran. I think it was like 4 or 5 laps with a damaged wing,
It's
past
trash.
everyone.
Absolute trash.
Yeah, ended up P10. So
because I was the same in the feature. I was like, I was 20 seconds in front of Mitchell and Kurt, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'll hold them out for 4 laps, and I'm losing 6 seconds a lap, and then they pass me. I'm like, oh yeah, see ya, mate. And then so it is what it is. But no, it should be good overall. In summary, looking forward to Austria. I think it's good. I think the position of the series is healthy. I think everyone's here for the right reason, and hopefully we can have a long and prosperous season 14.
Definitely.
100%.
All right. Well, thanks for everyone that tuned in, and hopefully we can make this a weekly thing and recap after Austria and ahead of Monza, which will be round 3. So thanks everyone for tuning in. Thanks Brandon and Kurt for joining me today. We'll see you guys next time.
See you guys.
Cheers.